Actions have consequences. In a series of turbulent decisions, the Chinese Communist Party derailed its tactful relationship with most Western corporations. Its newly founded hostility against the United States, unconditional friendship with Russia, and increasing military presence was bad news altogether. But for companies, it meant taking their business somewhere else. In a new trend, big giants are looking for passive and friendlier countries to secure their global supply chains. And before they pack up for good, they're laying off a massive number of employees in China, leaving the country to find a new wave of unemployment. Now, one of the biggest economies in the world is struggling to produce new jobs. What's happening in China? Let's get started. From offshoring to friendshoring. Back in the 1990s, the world found its new economic hero in globalization. The emerging, developing economies were on the front of forging new industries and workforces that were ready to be untapped by established corporations. It was pretty simple. Companies are always looking to minimize their manufacturing and operational costs. And when their home countries can't give them that particular competitive advantage, they simply look elsewhere. This is where China enters the game. Before it got popular as a manufacturing site, it was an anti-hero at best. Just like its other Asian counterparts, it was a developing economy. But then, it surpassed its competition to become everything Western corporations wanted. A sharp surge in China's cheap workforce and friendly corporate policies gave rise to the newest trend of the 90s, offshoring. Sure, the idea was super popular. It relied on tapping a labor force that was severely underpaid and unempowered. But as far as Western companies were concerned, they had hit a jackpot. China was offering a stable, cheap labor supply that wouldn't dare to unionize. The government wouldn't bug the parent company either, and well, that access to the global supply chain was a dream come true. In the blink of an eye, China became that popular kid in the school that everyone wanted to befriend. Since the 1990s, the superpower of the East has established itself as an offshoring hotspot. From Apple to Nike, even the most quintessential American brands couldn't resist offshoring to China to save and make big bucks. Over time, most Western brands were able to create a brand new consciousness in the country as well. And China itself has a cheaper knockoff for everything America produces, but the public wanted the real deal. As the middle-class sector expanded into the country, Western companies found a humongous market for their products too. So, what's not to like? Well, a lot apparently. We have come a long way since the 1990s. We can't say that globalization has lost its charm, but there are new geopolitical considerations in the matter. In the year 2023, China is no longer an economy that is building itself from the peripheries. You wish. Its military bullying can perhaps only rival the US and Russia, and with every passing day, China is shaping one geopolitical tension or the other. Taiwan, Hong Kong, the South China Sea, the Pacific Islands, Pakistan's Gwadar, and Djibouti in Africa. These are just a few examples of China's striking military presence in the world. And nope, those military hotspots aren't brimming with Chinese soldiers because that's just what superpowers do. Their active status tells us something alarming about the country's state of affairs, actually. China's vulnerable geopolitical standing is hurting its economic pursuits as more and more companies look for other, friendlier offshoring options. That's right, in this age and time, offshoring isn't simply enough. Friendshoring is the hottest trend in the world right now. Corporations want to move their operations to countries that aren't actively involved in geopolitical standoffs and blemishes. And this is exactly where China starts to lose its charm. What's happening in China? Call it a pandemic effect or China's Achilles heel. But many corporations are moving their operations out of the country to look for more friendly offshoring options. Despite its unprecedented devastation, the COVID-19 outbreak taught some valuable lessons to companies that had housed their major manufacturing units in China. Perhaps it was a long time coming, but corporations now know that over-reliance on Beijing was a bad idea. The pandemic itself had put major chokeholds on the global supply chain. As the CCP turned more and more industrial units into quarantine zones, major companies experienced extreme delays in product delivery. Apple is one of those big names that had to profusely apologize to its users for a profoundly late delivery schedule of the brand new iPhone. And sure, optically, the entire world was paralyzed under the pandemic. If companies like Apple had a more diverse assembling system during the peak outbreak days, it's easy to argue that the hiccups in the supply chain were inevitable regardless. But a quick glance at China's post-pandemic recovery rate would tell you otherwise. The truth is that the country took its sweet time to recover from the pandemic, and when it finally did, it found itself in hot waters with some major geopolitical tensions with its neighbor as well as its arch-rival, the United States of America. That alone was enough to push Western companies to find other options for their manufacturing and production units. Then, in 2022, Russia's war in Ukraine also brought Beijing to the vulnerable side of its economic standing. The CCP didn't miss a beat when it came down to supporting the war-hungry regime of Vladimir Putin. It was one partnership China had to value, and at the same time, its long-term corporate partners felt equally betrayed as they struggled with a high-risk environment in the country. Many corporations were left confused as Beijing left them high and dry in times of deep economic vulnerability. And you know what they say, one man's loss is another man's gain. Major layoffs in China. Countries like India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Taiwan rose to the occasion because, hey, for the first time ever, we saw China giving up on its absolute monopoly over strategic offshoring. While new emerging economies are bound to get a major boost for their working class, the CCP is suffering from the exact opposite problem. As companies are leaving China or minimizing their operations in the country, they are laying off major chunks of the Chinese workforce, rendering them unemployable. You see, China's already super-saturated job market can't simply adapt to major layoffs to welcome the newly unemployed workforce with open arms. That's pretty wishful, actually. Sure, the country has had its fair share of employability setbacks in the past. More or less, it has recovered from pulling its youth into a sheer, unresolvable economic crisis. But at this point in time, China's local industries are struggling to stay in business too. Optically, no corporation wants to align itself with the CCP, given its bizarre tendency to use its own industries for spyware projects and optimizing data lakes for surveillance. The Made in China's tag is getting increasingly bad for business, and it's a no-brainer that companies like Shein are laying off most of their workforce to set up their shops elsewhere. Even after the breakthrough success of TikTok, ByteDance can't afford to sit through another grilling Congress hearing to fight off the surveillance allegations. The company has publicly denounced any associations with the Chinese Communist Party and its technologically backed surveillance tools. But as long as ByteDance is headquartered in China, it can't make another case for its innocence. Its simple way out is to move its operations elsewhere, and it is doing so, yet quite gradually. It's not a surprise that the post-graduation unemployment rate is at an all-time high in China. Fresh graduates know that Western corporations aren't hiring, and the local companies rather outsource the jobs than hire Chinese citizens to clean up their act. It's safe to say that the Chinese Communist Party is grappling with severe economic challenges. For years, it has kept its Western counterparts in a heavily codependent relationship that was pretty unhealthy in many regards. But at the heart of it, it seemed like a fair deal. Major world corporations were capitalizing on cheap labor, minimal production costs, and a growing market share, while the CCP extracted employment for its whopping population. We all know that China has a grim history with population control. From its restrictive child policies to the let them die approach during the pandemic, the country has done everything controversial and inhumane to control the numbers. Even then, its population stands at 1.45 billion people in June 2023. And what's really concerning is that China's population isn't as gray as one might assume. In fact, it has among the most active and abundant manpower in the world. From 1985 to 2015, the country's working-age population grew from 594 million to more than 1,000 million, or 1 billion. Overall, China saw an increase of 72% in its already expansive workforce, that too within 3 decades. And these statistics tell us everything we need to know about China's internal state of affairs. The country is brimming with experienced and fresh candidates who are open to work. Yet, you'd hardly find we are hiring advertisements in the major centers of the country. So, do you think China's heading towards an unemployment recession? Let us know in the comments below, and we'll see you soon.